This is a Hague Corporate Affairs podcast in 2 parts. We are honored to be joined by the authors of the book Capitalism Reconnected, Towards a Sustainable, Inclusive and Innovative Market Economy.
In the times we are living, solid proposals for Capitalism Reconnected are most welcome.
Both authors, Professor Jan Peter Balkenende, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands and associate partner at Hague Corporate Affairs, and Professor Govert Buijs, join us in a conversation with Hague advisor Manon Dees and Hague Managing Director Sandra Maas to talk about their book.
Welcome, Govert and Jan Peter. Manon and I are really thrilled to have you here for the second part of our Hague Corporate Affairs podcast on Capitalism Reconnected and helping capitalism, as it were, grow up. And today we look into geopolitics and the role of Europe and European businesses. And a quick recap, though, we are talking about ideas in the new book that you've recently published. And the book provides insights and directions for mitigating the negative effects of prosperity and growth and creating a more just, equal, connected and sustainable form of capitalism. Reconnection is the main theme. We talk about reconnecting generations. We talk about reconnecting groups within nations. We talk about reconnecting nations within Europe, European nations with the rest of the world and the global south. And we talk about reconnecting with nature and the limits of our planet. And it's, in fact, a great read, we feel, for scientists, economic thinkers, researchers and business leaders. In short, a great book for everyone who feels the need for capitalism to grow up. You advocate for the repositioning of Europe next to the 2 large power blocks, the United States with their big capitalism and China with their state capitalism. You launched the book in the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago. And Roberto Metsola, the president of the EP, clearly stated, "We are living through times of unprecedented geopolitical change, requiring the repositioning of Europe. We need to be honest and we need to be bold." Now, question to you, Jan Peter, where do you see Europe standing at this point in time?
The situation, as we can see now, is a world that's splitting up. It is the rivalry between China and the US. We see the upcoming of India. They also want to play their role worldwide. That's clear. We see the global south. They would have also a place at the table at G20, for example. We see the BRICS countries, and they are also extending. You can see it's changing everywhere. And that's also sometimes combined with anti-Western sentiments. Also that we can see. So the question now is, if this goes on, what can be the consequence? I'm concerned about the fact that the world is falling apart if we want to reach global goals. If you want to reach SDGs, you must have in any case a willingness to work together. And there's a big risk is the world is falling apart. That's the point. That brings me, and that's your question, to the situation of Europe. You have to be aware of what is happening in the world and what can be our position in this world. And we believe in the power of ideas. That's what you can read in the book. And I have the conviction that if Europe would say, this on our mind, this is our view on what should be done, and then Europe, but also worldwide, if we want to have this type of economy, what can be our natural allies, for example? And then you see other types of cooperations, for example, working together with countries like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, Japan. So there are also other possibilities. That's one point. The second point is we have to invest in context of Africa. You see the decrease of population in countries like South Korea and Japan, and also China will see the same developments. You see an increase of population in Africa. So it's so important that we are aware of the fact that this continent is changing. So there is in fact a new global agenda for Europe. And I hope that we can talk in terms of what are the new future challenges, because there are so many anti-Western sentiments that has to do with colonialism and slavery and so on. It's all understandable. And we must not walk away for our history, that's true. But at the same moment, our obligation is to work on a perspective for the world that gives hope to people. And for me, it's absolutely clear that if we want to survive on this planet, if we want to create conditions for next generations, we need each other. It's crazy to think that you can combat climate change on your own. It's completely clear that if we have 10 billion people on this planet, we do not have the natural resources for that. So be honest about those developments, and I really hope that Europe can be a power that can stimulate the willingness to work together. That should be our orientation, based on ideas.
And for the listener, it could be perhaps thought of as talking about nations who need to take more responsibility. But in fact, you're also talking about the multi-actor approach and businesses.
Yeah, it's an excellent remark you're making. We have seen a huge focus during the last years on the big leaders, the autocrats and populists. And the question is, if we focus on all the autocrats and populists and so on, does this bring countries further, population further? I don't think so. And if you have difficulties between nation states, and we can see that, the question is, if you want to reach SDGs, is it only a matter of focusing on the heads of government, or do we also focus on businesses, business leaders, universities, NGOs, regions, cities? So we have also multi-actors on a global scale. And it's good to be aware of the power of those actors.
And if we zoom in on the role of businesses, which is obviously what we also do here at Hague. In the previous part of this podcast, you also mentioned that we need front runners. I believe it is also in the book that you mentioned the example of the Europe becoming a green technology hub, for example. So what can we expect from businesses to get together, to form coalitions and to really, fuel this change?
Yeah, you see already very interesting developments especially in Europe with the due diligence regulations there. That there is now, that is, you can say, is a legal issue, but is as well very much an issue that businesses can take up themselves to make sure that then not only that they are producing, you can say, in a green way, in a sustainable way in Europe, but that the entire chain is that you can really look at that and say, well, in this chain we really have worked on a human rights base and in a sustainable way. So and this is a very for the integrity of companies, it's very important that they do not separate their European part from the entire chain, but they take responsibility and organize that in a way as a kind of cooperation between you can say the European branches and their global supply chain. And that is part of legal requirements now. So speaking with businesses, at a certain stage there was kind of hesitance and resistance against it. But at a later stage, I see now that they say, well, actually, it is good. It's a good thing, and we should not only try to be, you would say, as minimalistic about it, but really endorse this idea and say this is important for our future. You can say the image, the integrity of our way of doing business, and it's very important that you can really say, well, we are not only just doing the legal minimum, but we are really taking this seriously, and we try to be what Paul Polman comes to be called net positive throughout our entire chain. I think
there is also an economic necessity to reflect on business in Europe, because if you are considering the analysis of the European Roundtable of industrialists, they say we are walking behind in Europe regarding patents, expenditure on R&D, competitiveness. So there's clearly a reason to think about economic activities in this part of the world. A few years ago, people said, well, hey, maybe something is changing in Silicon Valley, a bit less dynamic than in the past, but certainly has changed because of ChatGPT and AI and so on. So there is also reason for Europe to think about new economic activities. And I'm absolutely convinced that developments around climate change, circularity and so on, requires from companies also be creative you have chance if you talk battery technologies, for example, new materials and so on. We can do those things, but you must have a strategy to realize it. And that should also be a responsibility of and the European institutions and the business sector and the knowledge centers. And you must all do it in a way that it's very clear that you are changing things, and you must have concrete steps. Otherwise, you can forget it. A country like China, they work with the 5-year programs, and you've seen the results. You see the dynamism still in the US economy. And our hope is, and our conviction is, that Europe can make the difference by acting in another way. And also, therefore, we need the business sector that they show a new type of creativity regarding the demands of the future.
And at the same time, I think that's also what we encounter in our work, is that businesses still put their hopes, so to say, in the hands of governments, and they expect from governments that they will, because they have the instruments, of course. I mean, they have the instruments to enforce change. For example, when you talk about setting emission standards or enforcing true pricing, which is also one example that you mention in your book, or influencing consumer behavior. So we still need that government regulation, but it's also something that, in this multi-actor approach, it can also come from other actors, right? Yeah. So, but we still see that businesses put their hopes on governments.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very interesting question that you asking there. I think that is that's one part of the way to go is indeed that governments take initiatives. Like then a very nice, but a little bit older example, but of an entire new, you can say, sector that has been developed is, for example, Airbus, and that was a really kind of cooperation between European governments and the business sector. Really saying, well, we should not be entirely dependent on the United States. So I think these initiatives are important that Europe takes this. But there is as well something else that we advocate in our book, is saying, well, that when businesses take initiative to really to innovate and, for example, make their production much more sustainable, and then you can go, once the technology is there, to governments, and that is what Japan, for example, is doing. That is the so-called top runner program there. And that he say, well, okay, now this is possible. Now the government should regulate this, that within 2 years this becomes the new standard. And then you get, so to say, an innovation in the business sector that then is for the entire sector becomes the new standard. And then the company who was the front runner there immediately has its research and development costs already. They are already up to the new standards, and they can sell their technology to others. So these kind of things, I think, are the kind of what we are calling with this multi-actor approach, that everybody can take an initiative, and yet then at a certain stage you need another actor to take its role as well, to take it to the next level.
The point's a bit, sometimes you can see that companies are a bit reluctant to act and say, well, the government should. On the other hand, we need the governments for regulation, for taxation and so on. So that's clear, that's the role of the government. But the point is, if you have a common agenda, then you get more clarity about different roles. And then they can enforce each other. They can help each other. So you must have, I think, also willingness to cooperate, governments and the business sector and others, to achieve what is really essential to do for the future, for next generations. And of course, also companies can act on their own, even without regulation. For example, if you talk about carbon pricing, you can say we need a public instrument. And that's true, they're right. But you also can say, wait a moment, we already can start with an internally organized carbon pricing. And there are companies that are doing that. You can be a frontrunner. And I'm absolutely sure that those companies that are not waiting, but acting, they will be the winners in the long run.
And do you think creating a level playing field is an excuse companies sometimes use to be more bold?
Yeah, of course. But it'd be real if you would say, for example, we take measures regarding flying only as the Netherlands, and you're not taking into account, in any case, the European context, then it's a risky affair. You know that.
But sometimes we had this dialogue with certain representatives of various sectors, and at one stage we discussed that they say, well, you can as well ask for regulation as a sector. And that was kind of a strange idea. But what Mark Zuckerberg once said in Brussels, regulate us. In a way, you can ask, say, well, we need some regulation in terms of to prevent a kind of race to the bottom, so to say. But that is as well kind of part of your initiative that you take. Say, well, that you kind of break through the idea of the loneliness and the isolation in which you want to be. You attempt to be a good company, and others are running away with the profits. That you say, well, really, we need some new regulations here.
And this is also a matter of subsidiarity. Organize the things at the level that they occur. If you have really an international phenomenon, you need international regulation. If it has a national character, then of course you have more room to maneuver at the national scale. So subsidiarity also helps.
Yeah, and well, the common agenda that you advocate for is placed on a more European level. Is there also a way how we can maybe expand this to a more global level, while also taking into account, for example, the effects of hyperglobalization and our attempts to mitigate that?
Yeah, if you talk about things regarding climate change, for example, or other important elements that do with quality of life, you can say to other countries, wait a moment, you also subscribe to SDGs. What are you doing? That's what I'm concerned about. Another development, and that has to do with, let's say, human dignity. You mentioned this value earlier. You also see some tendencies in countries that are saying, oh, wait a moment, these are Western values. If you talk about violating human rights, it's not the right way just to put it away as a Western value. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, that happened after the Second World War, but it's important to underline the necessity of human dignity and human rights. So we'll have a lot of difficult discussions because in a lot of countries today, these rights are violated in a terrible way. That's what we can see. So there's also a responsibility for Europe to talk about those elements. So sometimes you can work together, sometimes you must be critical. Therefore, it's also good we are talking here about values. This is really about values.
Yeah, and our choice for Europe is not meant as a kind of way to build walls around Europe and to close in on Europe, but especially to say, well, to go beyond, you can say, the level of the nation state, because the Netherlands or even Germany or France in itself is not that powerful if you look at our global world today. So we need really a kind of power that can somehow match up to United States and to China and to play in that game, but to play that for the good.
Yeah. In summary, because again we've come to the end of the podcast, we could have made three series, but we will not, and maybe even more. But
we can read the entire book in a podcast.
Yeah. We've done that. It takes a little bit more time than a couple of hours. But in summary, what you propose is that Europe takes a leading role in this new era along three lines, and that's clearly indicated in the book. Reorienting the economy, so that's more circular, more regenerative. Reconnecting, which is a question of values, very much a question of values, groups and citizens, a new social contract, what you also talk about, and repositioning, that is linking to what you just stated, a stronger EU autonomy. Yeah. And we have two final questions for both of you. What's the first thing you would do if you had a magic wand? What is the first thing you would propose if you had a magic wand?
The first thing I would say is we need a new narrative for Europe, a new story for the future that can convince people, business, universities and so on. Because we are living now in a time that you have to rethink your own position. And we've had that after the Second World War. That was the first phase of integration. People said this should never happen again. In the 50s you could see that. In the 80s it was the story was very clear. We do not have a real single market. That was the goal of Europe 1992. And at this moment, we need again a new narrative for Europe.
To rewrite the narrative for Europe.
Exactly.
Thank you. And Govert, to end this podcast today?
Well, the current Commission is trying to redefine Europe as a geopolitical actor. And I think that is indeed important But that can only be a right thing to do if you do that for the good, and if you really have then your value orientation very clearly defined. So I think that is really is crucial for the place of Europe as well as an actor in that toward the global south, etc. And then really walk your talk. And I think there is still quite a world to gain. I think that still Europe. We saw it, for example, with the COVID vaccines, that there kind of is a competition almost, and Europe first, yes. We should really try to have this global perspective there. Yeah.
Walk the talk in a global world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.